The 25 greatest spoof movies of all time. There may not be a more wholly satisfying type of movie comedy than the spoof. It's a crude form of satire. Take a serious, successful thing and mercilessly poke fun at it. But when practiced by sharp-witted writers and filmmakers, it is an unbeatable entertainment bargain, typically clocking in under 90 minutes, that appeals to viewers of all ages. The subgenre took off in the 1970s and 80s thanks to Mel Brooks and the Zaz team of David Zucker, Jim Abrahams, and Jerry Zucker, and became reliably profitable in 1991 with the blockbuster duo of The Naked Gun 2 and The Smell of Fear and Hot Shots. The key to a great spoof: pile on the gags and never once allow for a moment of sincere levity. Spoof movies are still going strong nowadays, but, 30 years later, have they gotten better?
25. Hot Shots. 1991. Jim Abrahams' first solo spoof fires guided satirical missiles straight up the thrusters of Tony Scott's Top Gun. As a parody of American jingoism, it's pretty toothless. Hot Shots, Part 2, is much more pointed. But as a highlight reel for Lloyd Bridges, it is unassailable. While Charlie Sheen, Valeria Golino, and Cary Elwes are all willing doofuses, Bridges' portrait of an adult Navy admiral with a stainless steel ear canal and a paranoid hatred of crabs, they travel in pairs, don't you know, is a brilliant companion piece to the glue-sniffing Steve McCloskey in Airplane.
24. Rustler's Rhapsody, 1985. After creating WKRP in Cincinnati and making scads of money for Warner Brothers with Police Academy, Hugh Wilson had earned the opportunity to write his ticket. His passion project, Rustler's Rhapsody, is the opposite of every movie on this list in that it almost never goes for a belly laugh. It is gentle, affectionate, and strangely decent, a childlike lark about what might happen if Gene Autry got dumped into a John Ford Western. That's an awfully specific type of parody. The stronger pitch would have been Gene Autry in The Wild Bunch, but Wilson plays this whimsically. Tom Berenger-Hatton played Barnes in Platoon yet, so he was perfect casting as the singing cowboy Rex O'Hurley. How nice is this movie? Andy Griffith, decades removed from Lonesome Rhodes, is the bad guy.
23. I'm Gonna Get You Sucker. 1988. The problem with blaxploitation parodies is that most American moviegoers haven't seen the classics they're spoofing. This was especially true in 1988, which explains why Keenan Ivory Wayans' feature film-making debut sputtered at the box office, but, in time, became a cult video sensation. The movie works on two levels. For those who don't know the genre, it's a raucous, raunchy good time. For those that do, it's that and a knowing send-up of a cherished moment where black audiences could go see themselves in their neighborhoods on a big screen. The film essentially introduced viewers to the Wayans family, Chris Rock, Lemmy Get One Rib, and Robin Harris, while providing comeback roles for Bernie Casey, Isaac Hayes, Antonio Fargas, and Jim Brown. The scene where Keenan's Jack Spade gets busted for lying to a hookup, Anne-Marie Johnson, about the size of his manhood is a screamingly funny indictment of male desperation.
22. Amazon Women on the Moon, 1987. No one was clamoring for a sketch comedy throwback to the Kentucky Fried Movie, but John Landis got together some of his talented filmmaker friends, Joe Dante, Carl Gottlieb, Robert K. Weiss, and Peter Horton, and delivered a pop culture spoof roughly constructed around the now outmoded American propensity to plop one's butt on the couch and channel surf. It's a mixed bag, but the highs are towering. David Alan Grier as Don No Soul Simmons, the Harvey Pitnick roast, a fear-mongering STD short starring Carrie Fisher, and Gottlieb's masterful Son of the Invisible Man, in which mad scientist Ed Begley Jr. mistakenly believes he's perfected his invisibility formula. Spoiler, he hasn't, and proceeds to harass a local tavern while bare naked.
21. The Man with Two Brains, 1983. After the studied parody of Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, Carl Reiner and Steve Martin decided to let her rip with this unhinged spoof of mad scientist movies. Martin stars as the innovative brain surgeon Dr. Michael Heffer, who, after marrying poorly to a husband killer, Kathleen Turner, falls in love with a brain in a jar, the voice of Sissy Spacek, that can communicate with him telepathically. The film might have the least irresistible hook of the Reiner and Martin's four collaborations. but its unpredictability leaves the viewer vulnerable to some of the biggest laughs they've ever generated.
20. The Brady Bunch Movie, 1995. The novelty of a vintage sitcom getting cheekily transferred to the big screen had worn off somewhere around car 54, Where Are You in the Beverly Hillbillies? So Betty Thomas's The Brady Bunch movie didn't quite receive the critical hosannas it deserved in 1995. The level of mimicry is astonishing. Gary Cole was probably best known at the time for his portrayal of convicted murderer Jeffrey McDonald in Fatal Vision. So his effortless evocation of the wise and kind Mike Brady was downright virtuosic. In retrospect, dropping the square-ass Brady family into mid-90s America wasn't culture shock enough, and perhaps that's why the movie didn't leave a deeper imprint. The Clinton era was just too halcyon.
19. Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, 1948. Universal had run its classic monsters into the ground via ceaseless sequels over a decade plus, so the only way left to go was for the gut. Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein isn't just a lovingly silly, belly laugh-loaded send-off to Frankenstein's monster, Dracula, and the Wolfman, it's also the funniest movie in the comedy duo's canon. Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein isn't just a lovingly silly, belly laugh-loaded send-off to Frankenstein's monster, Dracula, and the Wolfman, it's also the funniest movie in the comedy duo's canon. The film gets a lot of mileage from Lou Costello gasping fear whenever left in a room by his lonesome with one of the monsters. But the film peaks in the third act at a masquerade ball that brings all of the nefarious creatures together.
18. Walk Hard, The Dewey Cox Story, 2007. Dewey Cox has to think about his entire life before he plays. The musician biopic was already a cliché-written parody of itself by the time Jake Kasdan and Judd Apatow gave it a zest-style spoofing with the rise and fall and rise and so on tale of a country western superstar, who's a little bit Cash and a little bit Elvis. At times, it plays like a beat-for-beat send-up of Walk the Line, with Riley Cox nursing guilt over having accidentally cut his brother in half with a machete. Every imaginable plot convention gets skewered, but the film's biggest laughs come courtesy of the songs, which sports titles like There's a Change A Happenin', Let's Duet, and Hole in My Pants.
17. Johnny Dangerously, 1984. Of all the classic Hollywood genres, gangster films have the simplest formula: a smart poor kid sees an express lane to riches via life of crime, becomes king of the hill, then topples all the way down to his death. Perhaps this tidiness scared our great film parodists from tackling the genre during their prime. Jim Abrahams was well off the top of his game when he made Jane Austen's Mafia. Though the film arrived a year after Brian De Palma's Scarface, it's neck-deep in references to Cagney-era wise guy business, to the quaint extent that it often feels like an extended Carol Burnett show sketch. It does get dirty, inexplicably so with the enlarged scrotum syndrome sequence, but it glides by on the daffy charm of Michael Keaton and Mary Lou Henner. Extra special praise to Richard Dimitri, whose Roman Moroni would have ensured the film an R rating if his profanity-laced tirades weren't as mangled as the rest of his English.
16. Three Amigos, 1986. This is in the same tonal ballpark as Rustler's Rhapsody in that it's an all-ages romp. But director John Landis gives his three comedy superstars, Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, and Martin Short, plenty of room to go for big laughs. Written by the unlikely trio of Martin, Randy Newman, and Lorne Michaels, one of only 2 screenplay credits for the SNL creator. It's largely a showcase for the leads, but Alfonso Arau steals multiple scenes as the perpetually flummoxed Bandito El Guapo. While Kai Wolf memorably portrays a German quick-draw artist who seems partially inspired by Baron von Schulenburg from Sergio Solima's spaghetti western classic, The Big Gundown.
15. Fear of a Black Hat, 1993. Chris Rock's CB4 was the bigger hit, but the definitive skewering of hip-hop culture and the 80s films it inspired can all be found in Rusty Cundiff's uproarious Fear of a Black Hat. It goes harder than Rock's movie, which is too enamored of its subject to land flush punches. Mostly, it goes after white conservative panic. Cundiff lampoons the macho posturing and juvenile misogyny of a musical movement that was empowering in all the same conflicting ways rock and roll was in the 1950s. Best of all, he nails the intellectual concern trolling that portrayed hip-hop as an ideological menace hell-bent on fomenting revolution. This winds up being painfully prescient. Maybe the music wasn't powerful enough.
14. Pop star, Never Stop Never Stopping, 2016. It's treacherous business attempting a music mockumentary knowing you'll inevitably get compared to This Is Spinal Tap. But the Lonely Island trio of Andy Samberg, Akiva Schaffer, and Jorma Taccone are essentially the modern-day equal of the Christopher Guest gang. And they nail the boy band phenomenon with total precision in this cult classic. Samberg stars as Connor Friel, a Bieber-esque teen idol tearing up the charts with hits like I'm So Humble and Turn Up the Beef. As a spoof of the form, the film breaks no new ground, but its absurdist view of the music industry hits hard because almost all of it is completely plausible.
13. The Kentucky Fried Movie, 1977. A chaotic spoof of film and television that launched the careers of the Zaz Trio and director John Landis. He got National Lampoon's Animal House off his work here. The hit-to-miss ratio here is extraordinarily high for a sketch comedy movie. It starts off incredibly strong with a morning news show goof, in which a sexually frustrated ape destroys the studio, and segues into more and more outrageous skits from there. The film loses a tad of momentum after its centerpiece, and Enter the Dragon parody called A Fistful of Yen wraps up. But several shorter skits, most notably Zinc Oxide and You, evoke enough laughs to make the whole 83-minute endeavor more than worth your while. There are two types of people in this world, those who worship Big Jim Slade, and those who've never seen Kentucky Fried Movie.
12. Hell's a Poppin', 1941, a chaotic stage sensation during its Broadway run in the late 1930s. The 1941 big-screen rendition of Hell's a Poppin' stands out for completely transmogrifying its meta-theatricality into an absurdist parody of the still quite young cinematic medium. The unifying element between the two shows is the long-forgotten vaudeville duo of Ole Olson and Chic Johnson, who bumble their way through a fractured fourth-wall production that largely spoofs the conventions of stage musicals. The film introduces a Pirandellian device that finds the projectionist, Shemp Howard, becoming a character in the story, if you can call it that, by fouling up the presentation of the movie. It's an anarchic delight that's been ripe for rediscovery since Joe Dante coaxed Warner Brothers into greenlighting a mega-budget remake under the guise of a Gremlins sequel.
11. Wet Hot American Summer, 2001. The state was, to some degree, the Gen X answer to Your Show of Shows. Broadcast ever so briefly on MTV, the sketch show could have done for comedy what Nirvana did for rock and roll. Alas, comedy nerds sick of SNL's corporate complacency were in far shorter supply than music fans desperate to rebel against the top 40 radio format. The culture finally, kinda got on their alt-humor wavelength when troupe member David Wayne's Wet Hot American Summer became a must-watch DVD in 2002. Ostensibly a parody of 1980s summer camp sex comedies. Wayne and co-writer/ex-stater Michael Showalter infused their film with a hyper-specific recall of the decade's strangest occurrences and obsessions. The movie's climax involves a training montage and the collapse of Skylab. For kids who grew up constantly skipping between HBO and MTV in the channel's early years, while devouring issues of Rolling Stone and Cream, Wet Hot American Summer is the warmest of movie blankets.
10. The Naked Gun, From the Files of Police Squad. 1988. In a Star Trek-like turnaround, the small-screen failure of Police Squad begat a hugely successful big-screen franchise that's quoted and cited incessantly today. All 3 entries in the series are loaded with laughs, but only the first installment offers the unmitigated joy of watching Leslie Nielsen, as Detective Frank Drebin, realize he could be so much more than a deadpan foil. Nielsen's exquisite timing, physical and verbal, combined with his total lack of shame results in, no hyperbole, one of the greatest comedic performances of all time. Like Eddie Murphy, Jack Benny, or John Candy at their peak, you're primed to laugh at any moment. The finale at Anaheim Stadium, where Drebin butchers the national anthem before ineptly umpiring an Angels-Mariners game, is zany anarchy worthy of the Marx Brothers. By the time the second movie rolled around, this was as much Nielsen's franchise as Zaz's. Indeed, this was the last time the trio would collaborate on a screenplay together.
9. Gremlins 2, The New Batch, 1990. There's no more accurate definition of chutzpah than convincing a major studio to let you sequelize your first major blockbuster with a full-on spoof of what made it a hit in the first place. Joe Dante's big-budget, funhouse follow-up to Gremlins is a deranged olio of monster movie tropes, media parody, and a slight takedown of Reagan-era corporate worship, represented by John Glover's Daniel Klump, a real estate developer/cable TV mogul clearly modeled after Donald Trump and Ted Turner. Creature creator Rick Baker is given free rein with the Gremlins designs, riffing on Universal's classic monsters and the Hammer reimaginings, with a very game Christopher Lee hamming it up as a mad scientist. For those who've seen at least 50% of the films Dante is referencing, it's a multiple viewing masterpiece.
8. MacGruber, 2010. What If MacGyver Sucked at Problem Solving was a terrific premise for a Saturday Night Live sketch, but it seemed awfully thin for a feature-length movie. Fortunately, Starwell Forte and his ace collaborators, Jorma Taccone and John Solomon, broadened the scope of the film's satire, resulting in a wild, remarkably well-directed spoof of big-budget Hollywood action movies. The film's relentless bad taste, exemplified by Forte offering to perform bizarre sexual favors for or on his commanding officer, played by Powers Booth, turned off most mainstream critics, while moviegoers avoided it like a Miami Marlins game. Now, it's widely regarded as one of the funniest movies of the 2010s. Forte and company will test their luck with a MacGruber series for Peacock.
7. Monty Python and the Holy Grail, 1975. The Monty Python lads take a blowtorch to the Arthurian legend with this hilarious absurd classic that is still turning precocious teenagers into fans of the British comedy troupe almost 50 years after its release. The sextet of lunatics aren't terribly interested in spoofing the conventions of medieval yarns, mostly, they just want to profane the subgenre with as many bad taste gags as the movie's 90-minute runtime will hold. Pretty much every set piece is a classic: Arthur's limb-by-limb defeat of the Black Knight, the vicious rabbit of Caer Bannog, felled by the holy hand grenade of Antioch, and the insult-hurling Frenchman of Castle Era. The Pythons' follow-up, Life of Brian, is every bit this film's equal, but it's more a spoof of religion than religious pictures.
6. Young Frankenstein, 1974. While Mel Brooks's Blazing Saddles takes a scattergun to the western, his Young Frankenstein, shot in black and white and presented in boxy old Academy ratio, is scalpel-like in its formal parody of James Whale's classic monster yarns. This restraint is, however, limited to the technical end. You can't bring together the likes of Gene Wilder, Marty Feldman, Terry Garr, Madeline Kahn, and Peter Boyle, and anything less than comedic bedlam. The film is loaded with enough filthy double entendres and belly laughs to necessitate multiple viewings to catch the jokes you laughed over your first, second, and third viewings. Wilder and Boyle's rendition of Puttin' on the Ritz is the consensus highlight, but it gets stiff competition from Gene Hackman's cameo as the lonely blind man strangely taken with the monster size. You must have been the tallest one in your class.
5. Airplane, 1980. Whereas Mel Brooks's big screen spoofery grew out of madcap musical reviews and the televised variety shows for which he wrote, the Zaz team's disaster movie goof prized verisimilitude. Practically a remake of the 1957 Scare in the Air non-classic 0 Hour, Airplane, gets some of its biggest laughs from the deadpan delivery of lines taken straight from its inspiration. It looks and sounds like a really bad studio programmer, which allows its zaniest detours, most notably a World War II movie parody that veers into a wildly anachronistic riff on Saturday Night Fever, thanks to a pair of brawling Girl Scouts, to hit like megaton comedy bombs. Airplane turned fading character actor Leslie Nielsen into one of Hollywood's top comedic draws, and inspired a generation of jokesters to emulate its laugh-a-second formula. It's one of the funniest and most influential films in the history of the medium.
4. Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, 1982. Carl Reiner and Steve Martin's finest collaboration is an aesthetically spot-on spoof of 1940s films noir. Martin stars as a hard-boiled private eye hired to investigate the suspicious death of a famous scientist and cheesemaker. This would be more than enough lunacy on its own, but the movie's ingenious hook has the star interacting with clips from some of the genre's classic works. Martin banters with golden era greats like Bette Davis, Barbara Stanwyck, and, best of all, Humphrey Bogart as his sartorially challenged colleague Marlowe. Reiner cleverly sought out the expertise of several legends who worked during the era. For example, composer Miklos Rozsa, production designer John DeQueer, and, in her final big screen credit, costumer Edith Head, and hired Raging Bull cinematographer Michael Chapman to give the film an authentic noir look. This adherence to detail heightens the sense of parody, which allows Reiner the luxury of understatement as he skillfully builds to his nutty finish.
3. Blazing Saddles, 1974. Comedies, westerns, and the cinema, in general, were never the same after Mel Brooks unleashed Blazing Saddles on an unsuspecting public. The gag-packed tale of a black sheriff sent to fail in a very white village uses the quintessential American movie genre to send up the utter stupidity of racism. Collaborating with genius-level writers like Andrew Bergman and Richard Pryor, whom the studio bounced from the lead role for iffy reasons. Brooks puts the viewer in cahoots with Cleven Little's lawman right from the start. We're all in on the joke, which, for 93 minutes, unites the audience in unabashed laughter at all manner of bad taste. As Brooks told an offended moviegoer, Blazing Saddles rises below vulgarity. It is also one of very few comedies that is every bit as hilarious as the day it was released.
2. This is Spinal Tap, 1984. There's never been a broader target for satire than rock and roll musicians or the rockumentaries they stumble through under the influence of God knows what. And the killer comedy quartet of Christopher Guest, Michael McKean, Harry Shearer, and Rob Reiner hit one bullseye after another. In this one-time cult favorite that is now one of the most quoted films of all time. That the three stars are talented musicians in their own right lends the movie a rare authenticity. Guest, McKean, and Shearer pour their souls into the intentionally silly songs they wrote, for example Big Bottom, Stonehenge. And they never break character or the fourth wall to let the audience in on the joke. It's squirm-inducing at times, getting lost in the bowels of the arena, or the limousine window divider getting rolled up on a too chatty Bruno Kirby. And that's because, for all its zaniness, it speaks the truth of life in the music industry. The mockumentary is now a thriving subgenre, but no one will ever do it better than the tap.
1. Top Secret, 1984. After the failure of their cop drama parody Police Squad, the Zaz Boys played it safe and made a hybrid spoof of 60s spy flicks, Elvis movies, and the kind of teeny bopper beach extravaganzas that went out of style around the timely Harvey Oswald proved to not be such a lousy marksman after all. Top Secret. Bombed in the busy summer of 1984, it hit the same month as Gremlins, Ghostbusters and The Karate Kid. But it's acquired a devoted cult following over the last 4 decades. It's the Zaz team's vertigo, an impassioned summation of bass obsessions that builds to a delirious climax, in this case, an Old West bar brawl in an underwater saloon. Val Kilmer is an eminently charming clown, and Omar Sharif delivers a heartbreaking portrayal of a double agent consigned to a living hell in the body of a smashed automobile.
Well, that's all, folks.
That's my line.
Step aside, babe. Let a star do this. That's all!
That's all, folks!